Hi all. So today I want to talk with you about some achievable climate solutions. I'm talking about things that don't require a whole bunch of new technology, things that we already have in hand right now. And there are a lot of messages out there that suggest that climate change solutions are just too hard. We can't get there. They're unachievable. But the reality is a lot of them are achievable. They're already being done. They're already being tried in a lot of cases for these three that I'm going to talk about today. Now, the first thing to understand about these climate solutions is that they solve multiple problems at once. They're habitat solutions for life. They are pollution solutions for smoggy cities. So they reduce the rate of asthma, especially for children in the low-income neighborhoods where pollution tends to be the worst. And they make getting to work easier and cheaper. They also make our water cleaner. And there's a lot else that these climate solutions can do, where things are cleaner, better, and safer for people and for all of the non-human life. These three solutions don't necessarily fit neatly into the category of, I can do this by myself, but they also require each of us to do what we can. And ultimately, if we want to plan solid climate solutions, we will each need to do a bit on our own, but we will also need to reach out and work with our communities. So let me start off with solution number one. Passive solar houses. If you follow a lot of sustainability content, you've probably heard of these. A passive solar house is one that is designed to let in a lot of sunshine during the colder seasons of the year. So wintertime here in Albuquerque, for example, and to keep a lot of the heat out during the summer. And a lot of that is just down to working with the angle of the sun in a given season. Keep the heat out with good overhangs for the summer, the winter sun will be lower and the sun will get inside. In addition, you build those houses so that they store a lot of the sun's energy. What that means is, for example, you might build up a floor that has a good thermal mass. That thermal mass is going to hold a lot of the sun's energy because as the sun comes in and hits the floor or maybe a wall, whether that object is the floor or the wall, it's going to be designed to retain that sun's heat as it builds up through the day. And it is also designed to slowly release it through the night. So it's a great way to keep our houses warm or cool depending on the season and comfortable without putting a lot of fossil fuel use into keeping our houses comfortable. So it's an important solution, partly because, well, more than half the energy we use in our homes is used to heat and cool our spaces. So things that we can do that are passive, that just work with the sun's existing energy or work with keeping the sun's energy out of the house can make an immense difference. So that's the basics of passive solar. I'm going to say a little bit more in another video. I grew up in a passive solar house for about 10 years of my life. And in that house, we had a whole bank of windows that faced full south. This is in Montana, by the way. And that bank of windows fed into a sunroom. The sunroom was closed off with glass from the rest of the house. So it still let in lots of light, but it enclosed all that heat. It had a floor made with concrete and gravel with a covering. And that floor, oh boy, it did a great job of storing heat. And so for a lot of the years, and from about the time it was feeling cool, below 70, all the way down to 40 or even maybe 35 degrees Fahrenheit, that house would stay perfectly warm and pleasant with zero fossil energy or zero use of our backup heat, which I'll talk about another time. So that house was warm and comfortable just because of the sun coming in the winter. The system then ensured that the heat got distributed really well to the whole house. We can heat and cool our houses with passive means by letting the sun in at the right times. And that means we also have to insulate our houses well, but we also need to keep the sun out at the right time. So for the summer, we need good overhangs or some really good deciduous trees standing in front of the windows so they lose their leaves in the winter and let the sun in the winter. So if we keep those things going, it can greatly reduce our household energy use. That energy for heating and cooling, that's about half of the energy that we use in our households. So that's a big input as a climate change solution. And of course, the more we can reduce the degree to which we're burning gas, to which we're using electricity, whichever version you use in your house to heat, if we can reduce those things or even eliminate those things, well, there you go. You have cut your household energy footprint in half. And you can say that to the fossil fuel companies. So this is a great way for us to think about shifting our building. That's not to say that you're going to be able to build your own house tomorrow or next week or even next year. But we as a society can look at how great these are as a solution and start thinking about how to build more of our houses along this model. So again, it's not really an individual solution necessarily, although households can choose to do this on their own. But if we slowly transition our houses as a society, and our apartment houses for that matter, toward a model like this, then hey, we can greatly reduce our energy use at home, which is a big deal all by itself. The next one is similarly crossing that public-private line as a solution. I can do some, but we need to work together to make it all happen on a big scale. Solution number 2 is public transit. Think about public transit as really our key transportation solution. We've thought a lot about electric cars as a society. We're making a big shift right now toward electric cars and away from gasoline-powered cars. And it's possible, if not entirely clear, it might be possible that using electric cars could reduce our carbon footprint somewhat as we shift away from gas-powered vehicles. But public transit does this on a much larger scale. So for example, if you compare cars to public transit in this image from Strong Towns, we can see how it's focusing on the difference in space, and specifically the space taken up by public transit. Here, buses are what we mean by public transit versus automobiles. And there's also a comparison to bikes. And the difference in space means that the city can capitalize on that space that's saved. Reducing cars opens up the space to allow for its use for other means of transportation. That might mean making dedicated bus lanes, which makes public transit faster. That might mean making better bike lanes, protected bike lanes, so that we can all, even the littlest kids and people in their wheelchairs, feel really safe using the roads. That might mean making more space for pedestrians so that it's more pleasant to walk. And in short, it can mean cutting down on the amount of space that we have for individual vehicles, most of which are still burning fossil fuels. And the central point, we can shift toward models that use a lot less fossil fuel because we're using them jointly. We're sharing bicycle trails and pedestrian paths, or we are sharing public transit. Now, I mentioned buses. And that might be the best entry route for cities getting into public transit. Some of that space could be taken up by things like trams or by light rail, and those things reduce our overall footprint further. So I would say slowing down car traffic, making it more safe and pleasant to be a pedestrian is part of the goal here. Reducing the pollution and therefore reducing the rates of asthma for kids in lower income neighborhoods, that's a big reason to do this. So already we're getting multiple benefits. And we need to think about how to make it so that cities can accomplish this relatively easily. American cities right now are using forms of transportation that are fairly individualized. But some cities have invested in things like rail in various forms. Some cities have only been able to go as far as buses. They're still kind of starting their public transit journeys, but some of those have moved to at least bus rapid transit, which allows you to have a much faster bus journey from one point to another because the bus gets dedicated lanes. Even here in Albuquerque, they have been able to do a little bit of bus rapid transit implementation. It makes a difference. Get you there just a little bit faster. Now, there's a lot of ways to make public transit easy and affordable. Albuquerque, for example, has made its buses free for use. Other cities have started charging fares to cars to keep them out of the center city, to reduce congestion, and again, to reduce pollution in the city center. Those fares can help support better public transit, as well as making the city more livable and better smelling. All of these end up making cities more pleasant and livable as they reduce air pollution, which is a very important consideration in a city like Albuquerque, which has pretty substantial air pollution. And that means, again, fewer kids with asthma. This is huge. Consider, we reduce our medical bills, make everybody healthier. We also make it easier and safer to get to work, and generally more pleasant. And public transit can reduce our greenhouse gas emissions by up to 2/3 per mile traveled when we compare it to things like cars. So that means you can reduce emissions by using public transportation, but more importantly, the more we work together to encourage our cities and our regions to invest in public transit, the more we will reduce our emissions. Think about it. You're going to work. You're stuck in traffic for half an hour. You're trying to get around everybody. Horns are honking. People are speeding around you. It's not pleasant, and you have to focus hard all the time. It's tiring. If you're riding the bus, if you're riding light rail, if you're riding the subway, all of a sudden you have that half hour that you were driving. A good public transit system can make the time for the journey the same length or even shorter than a car. And in a lot of cities in Europe, it's a lot faster to use public transit than it is to drive. And the same is true in a lot of Washington, D.C., where I used to live. So think about all the ways that public transit can improve your life. And also, like I said, it reduces emissions by up to 2/3. So it's a climate solution, but also provides solutions on a lot of other levels. Solution number 3, agroforestry. Out of all the industries, agriculture is probably most often touted as having the potential to be a climate solution instead of a climate problem. But what's the current reality? Worldwide, 1/4 to 1/3 of our greenhouse gas emissions come from agriculture and food-related industries. But here I want to focus on one of the best solutions that agriculture has to offer for climate change, and that is agroforestry. Agroforestry is where trees are integrated into a farm system. You might want to say plant nut trees in rows, let's say pecans. And maybe in between you start out by planting a grain, say wheat. As the trees get bigger, you might slowly transition into some other crops, maybe certain vegetables that do a little bit better with a little bit of shade. And as that slowly grows in, you may continue to switch out to other crops in between. But in other words, you have a tree that is producing a crop, and it's integrated with something else that is also producing a crop. Now, that's a pretty simple version, and that's what we usually call alley cropping. There are a lot of other versions where you can get a lot more complexity in there. You put in a whole lot more species in a very mixed setup, and it makes it possible to really improve the environment. The more species you have in a space, big generalization here, but for the moment, the more species you have, the better you have a good habitat for both humans and non-human species. And at the same time, when you plant multiple crops in the same space that use the space differently, like trees instead of grains, trees growing up high, grains growing down low, those things can actually increase the total amount of food that you can get out of a space. So we get an increase in food production by combining different plants together. So, I'm not talking about just plain apple orchards here. I'm really talking about growing trees as crops with other crops and integrating things together. And that allows us to really improve the degree to which our agriculture system is sequestering greenhouse gases. So it takes much more carbon out of the atmosphere, puts it in the soil, puts it in the bodies of the trees, and that is the agricultural practice that has the most potential to reduce greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. That's the 3 solutions. These are solutions that we have the technology for right now. We have all kinds of common technical know-how among the people that work in these fields. But all 3 of these could use a lot more people learning about them and implementing them. But like I say, there are people doing them right now. People are making them happen and making them work. And making a good living, creating healthier lives, ensuring safer places to get to work, these solutions approach all of these things. So again, I believe climate solutions should be things that improve lives all around, that don't just reduce emissions, but make habitats better for non-human things and also make our human lives better. And these 3 solutions are all things that can do that. They're all very achievable. We just need a lot more people to get excited and get on board. So that's 3 climate solutions I've got to talk to you about today, and I look forward to talking to you in the next video.